We worked very closely with Microsoft to develop the CMO Digital Transformation Workout ebook. And again, this is where we were targeting this director of marketing or head of marketing persona type. Then what we've done is kind of like optimized it into smaller pieces and fed our blog and content generation for probably 2 to 3 months with different, a little bit more of the expanded part for each one of those. We have shared it via email with our prospects, with our leads. We generated over 400 leads over the first few months. And by the way, we do convert those leads at about 8% or so over time. So we have generated the pipeline of over 450,000 within those few months.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Tomlinson, Global Channel Marketing Lead at Microsoft. Welcome to the Partner Marketing Pros podcast, where we have candid conversations with Microsoft partners all over the world who have achieved strong customer acquisition and retention from their excellence in marketing. In this podcast series, our partners are going to share marketing experiences, secrets, and best practices, as well as practical advice and resources that can help you improve your marketing results and drive growth. I'm excited to introduce you to your host today, Joanne Charlie, Chief Marketing Officer at Neural Impact. She is a professor of marketing at Capilano University in Canada, digital neuromarketer, and 35-year technology industry expert who has worked with Microsoft partners around the world to help transform their customer acquisition to align with the needs of the new Cloud Buyer 2.0. In this episode, we will explore the benefits of persona and personalization development aligned to the buyer's journey and a nurture motion with our featured partner today, Media Valet, an ISV partner based in the Vancouver, Canada area, who's a leader in cloud-based enterprise digital asset management and promises digital creative teams everywhere the most effective, scalable, and easy-to-use solution on the planet. With revenue growth at over 60% year after year, Media Valet has been recognized by Gartner as a leading enterprise solution, and we would like to welcome Maria Osipova, VP of Marketing at Media Valet.
Welcome, Maria. We really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your marketing smarts with us today. I think our listeners are going to be especially interested in hearing what you have to say because you're an outstanding revenue marketer and you've won many awards associated with that. And I'd like you to explain what do you mean by revenue marketer?
Absolutely. Well, when you think of a revenue marketer, it's really someone that's responsible for driving companies' growth and ultimately accountable for the portion of revenue. If we think back years ago, marketers were responsible for the brand, for the colors, for the leads, and kind of like stopping there and then handing over the baton to the sales. Well, in this case, you're responsible for generating the pipeline, for helping the sales team to improve their win rate, and ultimately, when the customer becomes a customer, is supporting their journey and making sure they are successful. So it's quite a bit of the responsibility overall, and there's many elements to it. So you would think of sales and marketing alignment that has to be figured out, improving processes and making them scalable. Team has to be focused on demand and pipeline generation, expanding accounts once the customers are brought in, and overall building the brand as a multiplier of all of those activities. So that's what, to me, the revenue marketer stands for.
And I think you made so many good points there. That alignment between sales and marketing. I mean, sales has changed the way they have to execute because our marketing environment, our digital environment has changed. And it's often said now that marketing is the new sales. And you made a point about these days with our changing buyer 2.0 who remains anonymous, sometimes up to 85% of the way through the buying journey. It is now incumbent upon marketing to shepherd the prospect through that buying journey, a greater percentage of the actual journey. And also you said something that's very prescient as well, that the nurture continues after the sale has been made. And this is increasingly important in a SaaS model. So marketing now has to continue its alignment with revenue generation in that cross-sell, upsell motion. I want to talk a little bit about, persona development and personalization, because today buyers have little time and patience when they're filtering through messaging and information in their buying process. It's one of the key reasons we need to really focus in on these personalized messages based on the persona type. So if a prospect comes to a website, for example, if they can't immediately find something that's relevant and something with which they have a rapport with, then they're instantly going to go on to the next option that they have on their organic search. So who are your key personas at Media Valet? How did you identify and validate them?
Absolutely. And just before I jump into that, I wanted to back up a tiny little bit and really agree with your point that customers are in control right now. It's up to them which resources and where on the website they go to. And their journey is not necessarily this ideal linear part. So as a marketer, you have to be ready for them to be anywhere within the journey. Listen to those triggers and understand how to serve content depending on where they are. So with that in mind, you just have to provide different type of materials and different type of content. So for Media Valet, we have identified three major persona types. The head of marketing could be CMO, director of marketing, depending on the organization. The mid-level marketing manager was the three major areas of focus: digital marketing, communications, or creative focus for that mid-level marketer. And then IT director. And it's absolutely unique in how they approach their buying decisions and their buying journeys. Usually what we see is our mid-level marketer is the champion. Those are the people that experience the pain firsthand and usually are tasked with resolving that and finding the right vendor. The way we've identified those is we've gone through a very thorough process of our own pipeline and customer list evaluation, looking at each unique use case and looking who did we engage with first, and then who was the most involved into this buying decision outside of the person, identifying the two key people and then breaking them down into those group titles. And this is what we found, that usually there is two major influences from the IT, from the head of marketing, and the champion at this mid-level that's driving the deal. This is also a living and breathing best practices set or persona set that we do evaluate every year as our business evolves, as the digital asset management space evolves overall.
Yeah, that's a very good point, that evolution, just because it was valid a year ago, it may not be valid going into the future. Just as we've seen buyer behavior change in the last several years, so too with our actual customers and prospects. So you identified those three different persona types, and that's a very important thing we generally talk about with the partners, looking at the three different levels of personas. We call them the why, how, and the what. So the why are usually at the executive level. So you identified the chief marketing officer, and so they have things, pains and gains that resonate with them at a very macro level. And then you have that, you call them the digital marketing manager perhaps, so that person who's the line of business, who's actually in the trenches with the day-to-day responsibility, the operational responsibility. So they have their needs. And then, of course, we still have the IT or the end user. We have the IT professional who's, again, a trusted advisor, and they're looking at a different level of features and functionality, security, things that drive their world. So you've done a great job of identifying those three different personas. Why couldn't you just choose one of them and just create one persona and use one kind of approach for all of them? Why are your differences important?
That is a fantastic question. And really, the key to identifying personas is understanding the customers. And as we know right now, actually, for the complex B2B sales, there's 7 to 9 decision makers involved. So that almost pushes you to go beyond the 3, but then it becomes really, really complex. But the reasons and behaviors driving each one of the buyers are completely different. So even if I were to take someone pretty similar like the CMO and the digital marketing manager, you would think they're within the same department, within the same division. But CMO is driven by a much larger scale of considerations. They're looking at the brand governance, again, at the company-wide scale. They're looking at the global focus and enabling their different divisions and different parts within the marketing And also they're looking, yes, at the immediate ROI, but also future scale of an ROI, and maybe even the legacy of the organization from the digital or asset perspectives. If you look at the marketing manager, very, very different considerations right there. First, they're tasked with the project. They absolutely have to make sure that it is successful, that it benefits their department and their line, that it adds efficiencies as opposed to, extra responsibilities. Those are very different scopes and pains to solve. So when I look at it from the development of content perspective, for the manager itself, we're providing a lot of information that's narrow-focused digital asset management related. How to buy things, how to reduce the scope to make it successful, how to involve right people within the buying decision, how to implement it right, and what to know in advance. With the CMOs, it's a very different scope. It's what is the overall ROI of the solution? How would it impact other C-level decision makers? So taking it a step up. And, if I were to provide it to the digital manager, they would not relate to this, and they would actually almost freak out and say, okay, this doesn't address my pains at all. It actually expands the scope. So very different perspectives and very different type of content that's involved.
So really understanding sort of what the function, what each of these personas do, what really keeps them up at night, what rocks their world, what pains and gains that are going on in their world. And you've got to then differentiate what is pertinent and relevant to each of these personas. So what's the most valuable thing you do in terms of application of personas?
I think one of the things is really developing the process, because it can get very quickly very complex, right? You have multiple personas mapped along maybe 6, 7 different stages that they travel against the buyer journey. So as simple as a spreadsheet with this matrix of the content mapped to different stages and then applied to different persona. And you know what? For your champion, it might be pretty complex, maybe 3 to 4 different content types per stage. For the influencers, you just have to make sure that you have 1 or 2 pieces of content, and it could be as simple as an image or infographic that would hit that stage without driving it to a crazy, crazy complexity.
And if you could share with us, is there one successful digital campaign that you've developed for one specific persona?
Just last year, we worked very closely with Microsoft to develop the CMO Digital Transformation Workout ebook. And again, this is where we were targeting this director of marketing or head of marketing persona type. And at the same time, it's something that sometimes digital asset management is not part of their world, not really understanding how foundational it is for the marketing organization. So we've built the ebook that addresses the CMOs and addresses their entire responsibility for different lines of marketing. And this was our core piece of content. Then what we've done is kind of like optimized it into smaller pieces and fed our blog and content generation for probably 2 to 3 months with a little bit more of the expanded part for each one of those. We have shared it via email with our prospects, with our leads. We generated over 400 leads over the first few months since launching the ebook. So it was really getting a really great pickup. And by the way, we do convert those leads at about 8% or so over time. So we have generated the pipeline of over 450,000 within those few months, which was already successful within it. But also, this was the book that was applied to the sales team for the active opportunity. So maybe they had a champion that had difficulty pitching the project to their leaders or securing the budget. They would leverage this ebook specifically to drive the opportunity further. We have also used it in nurturing some of the not responding opportunities and maybe igniting a different interest and finding a different angle. So in addition to driving that pipeline that we've done, we have also improved the sales win rates and enabled the sales team with another really valuable reason to get in touch with their opportunities. So really a lot of applications, plus just our content team could sit back for a little bit and have, out of a large ebook, the blog post going for a few months.
So that's an excellent thing to think about, is what's going to be your anchor piece of content. What's that pillar? And then, as you said, how to atomize each piece, how to take a slice of it and apply it to a different format and to a different channel and slightly change the lens of it to make it work for different purposes. And I love the fact that you're able to track it and quantify it, and the fact that it was applicable to not only sort of traditional marketing ROI, but also this is your revenue marketing chops, is applying it to how it actually had an impact on sales and the sales organization as well. So I want to touch on the topic of the customer buyer journey. So in addition to creating sort of content, especially that example that you just gave us, so content that relates to each buyer persona's pain points, it also has to map back to the buyer's journey. And IDC and Microsoft have outlined the 6 stages model that a buyer usually progresses through. And the first 3 are around exploration, evaluation, and purchase. And that's very much a prospect sort of focus. But increasingly in this cloud-based world, we also need to think about the continued journey now that we've got these latter stages of expansion, renewal, and advocacy. So, Maria, I want to ask you about how you coordinate all of these things at Media Valet. How do your marketing tactics change by the stage of the buying journey?
That's an excellent question, and something that marketers should keep in mind, especially within the software as a service technology field, because it's not just gaining the customer to begin with, it's keeping them and keeping them happy. That's at the core of the SaaS business model. So for us, first of all, it's making sure that implementation is successful and that we have the nurture through this first onboarding time that fits the best practices into the champion and the team that's implementing. After that, what we focus on is really making sure that the usage of the solution is maximized. So whether we're bringing in new features, whether we're launching new products, or maybe beta testing, it's our job to make sure that the customers are aware of this. And we do this in 2 interesting ways. One is a bit more of a traditional way, which is sending the emails, sending the newsletters. Another part is we've built in an app within the Media Valet system itself that actually looking at where the usage is happening from the customer perspective, feeds the suggestions, whether it's the new product feature, whether it's something that a best practice that can be applied to this. So this had been really successful and really well received by the customers and greatly improved the adoption of our platform and just kind of the success rates overall.
Wow. So you take a lot of different assets or a lot of different outcomes from different phases of the journey, and you look for applications in other parts of the journey. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's correct. And also looking at the technology possibilities, where are actually customers spending their time? Maybe initially it was the email, but then once they're using the system, other ways to serve the content right inside the platform.
So we've got this complexity of marketing tactics changing by whether they're, say, in the evaluation phase or whether they're looking at, expansion. So then we have to then overlay, how do the personas fit in with this? So we've looked at the 6 stages of the buying journey and the tactics that are useful there. Then how do then the personas inform this kind of journey and motion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you said, it definitely adds the complexity. But what you have to understand, and this is why aligning with sales and working with the sales teams hand in hand is so important, it's not every persona is always present and always active at every part of the buy-in stage. It's also important to understand that some of the personas will be heavily influencing certain parts. With IT, for us, it's definitely the part of the selection and just vendor verification stage. Does it align with the overall corporate strategy? Does it introduce new risks that IT cannot allow into the organization? And does it tie in with their overall, let's say, technology transformation? After that, though, maybe just during the onboarding, they need to be addressed and API best practices delivered. But after that, IT is not as present. So we have to understand that after that, it's almost detrimental to keep, feeding additional content because their part within the journey is almost over at that point. So it's understanding exactly where they fit in and how this content mapping applies across the entire process.
So what I'm hearing is that you look at all the assets that you have, all the tactics that need to be at each of the 6 stages of the journey, and then you overlay which persona is going to be most motivated. Where does the persona actually prioritize a time in the journey? And then you skew your attention to certain tactics when you know one persona is going to be sort of the overwhelming influencer at that particular stage.
Exactly. Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about social strategies. You know, it's a very topical priority area for marketers to look at, because social, especially with the newer Buyer 2.0 prospect, it's a big part of their world. So do you find that with your different personas, they use different social networks, that they display different social characteristics?
Absolutely. Social networks and content boards for distribution channels are different dependent on the persona, at least within our experience. So for CMOs, we find that LinkedIn is something that they are present on, something that they're checking, especially people that they trust, or if our executive managed to make a connection, they definitely engaged with the post to encourage the sales team to share all of the post and content. And this is how we know that they're definitely seeing the content availability, the thought leadership. We're also attaching digital campaigns to that. So we're targeting this persona within LinkedIn with the promoted posts. That works really well for the CMOs. For the mid-level managers, especially the ones that are focused, let's say, on the creative area, we found that Instagram works really well because they're the visual and creative types, and that's the type of network that they interact with, where they're seeing the design tips, where they're following other influencers, and Media Valet becomes part of that conversation. For someone that's in the digital space, Twitter works really well because it's part of their responsibility digital campaigns. They're watching their company mentions, they're watching for best practices, and again, this is where we're seeing a strong engagement with the content types, driving the traffic to the site, and then to the further actions within the website, sometimes requesting additional demos or information.
So that's a really good reminder for marketers out there, is not to just blithely go into deciding that you're going to be across every social platform, is really understanding what drives the environment of your persona. So understanding, where does your particular persona go to connect with their peers? Where are they going to research information and to look for social proof, etc.? So it's don't just be everywhere and anywhere with everything that you've got. It's to really understand which social platform your particular persona goes to, because you want to align the assets or the calls to action that you're going to put on all these different social networks with that persona. So you talked about the fact that you create different assets for different personas, and sometimes that you create assets for, say, maybe your chief marketing officer, but you're not expecting that that chief marketing officer will actually find that asset. You've created it in the anticipation that your, mid-level marketing operational person will actually have to sell to their CMO their sort of decision on your solution. So you create assets for the higher level persona, but you use a mid-level persona to push that asset. Do you want to just enlarge on that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important consideration. So whenever we create content, ultimately we're trying to deliver value to the person we're talking to, which means making their job a little bit easier, maybe making their decision process a little bit easier, and having to sell this internal project to to the C-level stakeholders, to their bosses, is one of the pretty hefty tasks for this person. So if we can help them address that step, if we can do some of the job for them, then it delivers value. And things like that would be, let's say, the stakeholder presentation, right? Addressing the known challenges for CMOs, for CFOs, for the director of IT within the organization. Sometimes mid-level manager might not even understand that the IT director looks at the solution like a DAM from a very different perspective. So understanding their challenges, addressing with the benefits that are targeted to them is really helpful. On the other hand, ROI calculator. The CMO might not understand how painful it is, or might not even so much care, how long it takes a graphic designer to find all the necessary assets. But they do understand the revenue and the marketing budget that might be lost. So understanding and providing that information in an easy calculatable way in the interactive calculator all of a sudden helps to put this project into perspective and yes, address the needs of this mid-level manager, but deliver the benefits that CMO is looking for. And again, it saves hours of the research in putting that information together for our champion and truly delivers value.
So you're passionate about running marketing by the numbers, and we can hear that in everything that you've said. You tend to quantify everything. You're looking at ROI constantly and productivity and efficiency, and also for whom you sell to. So can you briefly explain how you wrap up your persona content development in a nurture calendar while planning for these ROIs, these metrics, these outcomes that absolutely make a difference for Media Valet?
And I think you've hit on a lot of different points here. So when I work with my team, I sometimes try to simplify it and provide three major areas of focus that we will keep in mind and map our activities and our strategies to. And those are pipeline generation, a really big one, affecting the win rate, and then making sure that we're always there looking after the brand and make sure that is positioned correctly. So within those three areas of focus, pipeline is obviously the easiest to quantify. And this is being broken down based from the total revenue target into how many opportunities we need to generate within the quarter, down to the month, and then down to each of the digital channels, or maybe the team activities from the business development perspective. This is where the content and nurture really maps to, because in order for us to convert some of the leads or make sure that this lead generation is optimized, we will use and leverage content and personas to increase the conversion rates within this. So absolutely, it is mapped at different stages. And then when we look at win rate, again, how can we help a salesperson to make sure that they win their opportunities faster, that they're moving smoother, there is no bottlenecks at the end? Well, content is amazing for that. So we'll map the content to that later stage. So ROI calculator is one of the most requested pieces and most frequently used pieces there. Something like the directions on how many stakeholders and which stage they have to be involved really eliminates this bottleneck at the end. If the legal or IT just comes up and just shuts down the project, we provide the content that helps educate the buyer that this has to be introduced early on. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to the whether this pipeline was generated and whether it did get to the revenue. And we have very specific metrics attached to each person within the team and pretty much evaluated every week. Are we on track? Are we getting close to the target?
That's great. I mean, there's lots of partners out there listening right now that'll be able to relate because they know how vitally important it is to be able to do a lot with constrained resources. So you have to really look at how every marketing activity that you embark on has an impact, and what is that bottom line impact. You talk about pipeline, you talk about leads, you talk about win rates, and blowing out bottlenecks. So there's lots of smaller partners out there, and they don't have the time or the money to spare. They can't afford to be undertaking campaigns or any kind of activities that just don't deliver. So thanks for sharing those insights, because you're a small and mighty company yourself. You have a small and on-point team that lives and breathes by these kinds of metrics. So that's really great advice. We're almost out of time, but before we leave, could you recommend a book or a blog or a website or a resource to the partners listening to learn more about what we've discussed here that could help them implement some of these strategies?
Absolutely. And I think what you've mentioned here is really the core tenant content types. And one of my favorite resources around this is the blog post by Jay Akonzo, and I think we will share the link at the end, and it's called The Content Marketing Wheel. So this talks exactly about how do you identify the area that would first deliver value to the customer, but also will indicate to you, the company, that if the prospect has engaged with that content, there is a potential project there. So for us, the very first ebook that we've developed before even having a content writer on staff or having the formal budget to hire someone was getting started with digital asset management. To us, this was our core expertise. This is something that we knew and could give away the value add to the customers. To the customer, it also meant that if they're reading this, well, they are looking into digital asset management, or there is a win-win on both sides, and then making sure that the content is large and comprehensive enough that it can be broken down into the smaller parts that would feed the content machine for weeks after all. So this resource pretty much step by step tells you exactly how to approach it and how to dig deep inside your own company to be able to deliver this ebook even without the extensive writing stuff on hire.
Thanks, Maria, for sharing your experiences with us today, sort of the tips and tricks and the best practices. You've given our listeners a lot to think about and a lot of guidance around why persona and personalization messaging is important and how to align that to the 6-part buyer journey and finally into a nurture motion. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, John. It's been a great pleasure and excellent questions and areas to focus on.
Thank you for listening to the Partner Marketing Pros podcast. We hope you gained some fresh insights and learned some new practical ideas today that you can implement in your marketing program. See a detailed transcript of the session and helpful links in the show notes. You can find this on your favorite podcast app by following the Microsoft Partner Network podcast, and this Marketing Pros series is featured there. You can also link to the podcast from the Smart Partner Marketing page on the Microsoft site at aka.ms/smartmarketing.